The following podcast is a deep, shallow dive production.
And you're going to love it.
Okay, let's go.
Hey, what's up, everybody? All right, so check it out. Today, I'm going to do something that, gosh, I've been wanting to do more of this, and I've been a little lazy, not going to lie. But basically, there have been a variety of different podcast episodes from other people, and this one's going to be from my girl, Candace Owens, whom you guys know I absolutely think is the shiznit. Honestly, I think she's super intelligent, well-spoken, and man, she brings receipts with stuff. So this is an episode she did a couple months ago in regards to 9/11. And this is a little bit of follow-up on yesterday's episode. You know, if you didn't get a chance to listen to yesterday's episode, give it a listen because I talked about a variety of things, and one of the things I've talked about was I brought a quote in, or I brought a section in from this guy, Matt Kim, where he talked about, variety of, I guess, conspiracy theories, if you want to call them that, but things that basically I think have really come to light over the past several years. And then, like I mentioned yesterday, definitely over the past year. And a lot of that is precipitated by basically those that are paying attention, watching what has played out in terms of the situation in Gaza. I think that's been an eye-opening experience for many, many people. And it's really caused Pandora's box to be opened up on so many things. And 9/11 is one of them. So I'm going to play Candace's episode and then chime in here and there. But, what I really like about what she talked about, and it's really what I'm going to talk about, and I might pull a few more clips from other places into it, but it's not about the two towers, okay? We're going to talk about Building 7, and then I don't know if she gets into the Pentagon, and then the flight number 93, which crashed in that field in Pennsylvania. But I definitely know she's going to talk a lot about Building 7 and then a few other things. So, all right, let's get into that.
I promised you that today we were going to be discussing Building 7, 9/11, a lot of things that we are told that we should never forget. But I mean, I have a theory. I think in reality, there are a lot of things that we're supposed to never remember. I mean, we know how this works now. We're all kind of falling down the rabbit hole together, realizing that a lot of things that we thought were so really are not, and that in reality, there have been some people engaged in creating mass psychosis events, things that are so traumatizing to the public that it completely modifies our human behavior. And what bigger event, and I'm talking, of course, about myself at the time, I'm a millennial, I think I was in 6th grade. What bigger event do you have in your memory than 9/11? You know exactly where you were. And there may be some things, maybe you were too young, that should have struck you as odd then, but will definitely strike you as odd now. And we're going to talk about those things. I'm going to give you 5 things that you should definitely never remember about 9/11.
All right, so obviously when she says 5 things you should never remember about 9/11, she's being facetious with that. But before she gets into that, I am going to intersperse a few different things, kind of just to set the stage a little. So remember, one of the things, that really was amazing was that they found the hijackers' passports.
How could Mohammed Atta's passport survive the fireball explosion that supposedly cremated him, fly out of his pocket, fly out of the incinerated plane, flutter to the ground into 2 feet of debris, and end up in readable condition in the hands of investigators, all within 48 hours? Why did 19 Muslim men even need passports on domestic flights?
So this was literally a CNN news report on it. So let's hear the rest of it. But actually, before I play the rest of it, I mean, seriously, think about that. How on earth did that passport make its way from the top of that building through all of that, I mean, insane amounts of debris and then get discovered a passport in perfect condition, laying in the ashes?
How were passports found but not the plane's voice recorders? Why did the hijackers need passports they would never use again after their suicide flights? And why were the 19 accused Muslims not under surveillance on 911 if they were so easy to identify? The conspicuous trail of planted evidence continued 3 weeks after the 911 attacks, when anthrax letters killed 5 people and were clearly worded to throw the blame on Muslims.
So again, I mean, just, we've got hindsight now, and we also have, obviously a lot more awareness to things. But, just think about what she's talking about and just how crazy it all sounds now.
Death to America, death to Israel. Allah is great. It has since been proven that the anthrax came from a U.S. Army lab and was never mailed by Muslims.
So I did fact check that. She's totally right. That anthrax was never sent by Muslims. It did come from a U.S. Army lab. And then the other thing that's interesting is, there is the tie to Israel. So that's going to come out. I think Candace is going to talk a lot more about that.
There are no airport security videos of any of the 19 accused Muslims boarding any of the hijacked planes.
All right, obviously that's weird as well. There's no security footage of any of those guys boarding any of the hijacked planes. All right, so that was CNN. Okay, now I'm going to turn it over to Candace Owens.
All right, so what was the psychosis that was formulated after 9/11? I would say that all of us feared Muslims without question. I could not stand being around them. I just thought every single one of them was going to be a terrorist. I did. I felt that way. I didn't want to go to their houses. I didn't want to be friends with them. I actually felt so badly yesterday. There was some thread that went viral on Twitter, and it was a younger Muslim woman discussing how it was for her when on 9/11 she got picked up from school and her dad sat her down and explained to her essentially that things were about to get really bad for her. And she didn't understand. She didn't do anything. And her dad explained to her that didn't really matter because she was going to be blamed. And I felt badly because I know that I was one of these people that just blamed all Muslims. But by the way, I was programmed to do that. I mean, come on. You know that was the vibe they were putting down. They're all terrorists. Give up. They're going to come for us. They're taking down towers. They are radical. They're jihadists. And they impressed upon the youth, the future generation, that no matter what, whatever we did in the Middle East didn't matter because we were getting terrorists, right? It had a major implication on our foreign policy for decades to come, still today.
So again, just remember, I mean, she said it in kind of a joking, smart alecky way, but really fundamentally what 9/11 did was it set the stage. And again, we've got hindsight. And so obviously hindsight is 2020 now, but it set the stage for the military-industrial complex, the forever wars. It set the stage for that 20-year never-ending war in Afghanistan. It set the stage for invading Iraq, which at the time was probably the 4th largest country in terms of their oil reserves. Remember, their oil reserves, Iraq was incredibly rich in oil. And so now all of a sudden, that allowed the invasion of Iraq. It allowed Saddam Hussein to be killed. It allowed Osama bin Laden to be killed. So the funny part about that is Saddam Hussein in Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. The terrorists were supposedly all Al-Qaeda under Osama bin Laden. Isn't that funny? I mean, seriously, that just shows you how, people make the joke that all Asian people look the same or all black people look the same. But in that situation, they kind of grouped all Islamic countries as one and the same. And it was okay, let's go after Saddam Hussein. Wait, Saddam didn't have anything to do with 9/11.
Still today, you're not supposed to bat an eyelash when Muslim kids are blown up. That's kind of the vibe. And if you do bat an eyelash, well, you'll end up on Rumble because you're not allowed to talk about these things.
This girl is seriously so clever and so witty. That is hilarious. If you don't know what Rumble is, Rumble's basically that platform that got created, and it's really initially been kind of a conservative platform, but it's pretty much at where everybody goes. And, you know, they've built a monster audience now, and it's a very successful business now, but it was where everybody would go when YouTube would deplatform them or demonetize them. She is seriously very funny. The other thing she kind of alluded to there is when she said Muslims to this day. So this really does talk about and reference kind of, like I said, what's going on in Gaza and Palestine.
In mainstream places, but the public is waking up and we're definitely going to discuss them. Just want to say right at the top here, I know there are so many people, look, I grew up in Stamford, Connecticut, who know families, who know individuals whose lives were impacted by this event. There is no question that this event happened. And we don't speak about this event and all of these question marks because we disrespect these individuals, but actually it's out of a tremendous amount of respect. As in, if this had happened to my family members, I would never rest until I got the answers to the questions that I'm about to ask. I would never rest. And so, as I said, we are doing this out of reverence for the victims and the victims' families. So what do we have first? Okay, well, something that they don't want you to remember is how odd it is that in all of the madness and all of the days following 9/11 and in the day leading up to 9/11, we were essentially told that we couldn't find human bodies and we had to understand how steel could melt. But what luck, because we knew exactly who did it instantly, because they just kept finding passports. Do you remember this? Check out this news clip.
All right, so this is funny. Obviously, I had listened to her episode previously, but it was like last month, so I don't remember exactly what she talked about. So I'm kind of doing this as I go. I'm stringing this out as I go. So obviously, I played that clip about Mohammed Atta's passport. So let's see what she says or what clip she uses.
Another development on Saturday, New York officials revealed at a news conference here in the city that a hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that. No other details were given, but the discovery prompted the FBI and police to expand the search area down in Lower Manhattan.
I think that was a CBS News clip, but like another passport was found blocks from the crash site.
He says, if you can believe that, and the answer is no, I cannot believe that, but that is the reality. In total, we were told that 4 of the hijackers' passports survived in whole or in part. 2, they said, were recovered from the crash site of United Airlines Flight 93 in Pennsylvania. So like this plane crashed, but they were able once again to find paper. You guys have a passport today. Just imagine paper somehow where we're able to recover this from a crash site.
I don't know if she's going to get into this, but remember that Flight 93 that crashed in that field in Pennsylvania, there was no remnants of a plane. That was another one. That one in the Pentagon, there were no remnants of a plane. No seats, no wing, no gigantic steel engine, but somehow 2 paper passports survived in that field.
And they also found the passport of one hijacker on American Airlines Flight 11. They said a passerby had picked it up and given it to an NYPD detective shortly before the World Trade Center towers collapsed. Now, of course, if you're thinking rationally and not emotionally, you're going, what's going on? What are these hijackers doing? Why are they sprinkling their passports? Like that in of itself is weird. So you're telling me when that plane crashed in Pennsylvania, what did he roll down the window of the plane, which you can't roll down, and drop it out? Or he had it on him and it just, again, was recovered? What's going on here? Why are there passports? And the World Trade Center, what happened as the plane was coming in? He dropped his passport. He was flying to New York. A lot of questions there. But again, these are supposed to be things that we are not supposed to remember. And if you can believe it, then I guess, like that guy says, then you can believe it.
All right, just to break this up a little bit, I'm going to intersperse some of the other clips that I've downloaded for this episode. But again, I don't really remember all the things she talks about, but whatever, it's fine. Repetition is the mother of all learning. I love that phrase.
Outside the Pentagon, CNN's military affairs correspondent Jamie McIntyre. And Jamie, you got very close to where that plane went down.
That's right, Judy. A while ago, I walked right up to next to the building. Firefighters were still trying to put out the blaze. The fire, by the way, is still burning in some parts of the Pentagon. And I took a look at the huge gaping hole that's in this sideway, but from my close-up inspection, there's no evidence of a plane having crashed anywhere near the Pentagon. The only site is the actual side of the building that's crashed in, and as I said, the only pieces left that you can see are small enough that you could pick up in your hand. There are no large tail sections, wing sections, a fuselage, nothing like that anywhere around.
All right, so that was ABC News, and that was the Pentagon thing. And again, remember, no plane. Where's the plane? And then the other thing about the Pentagon is a very low-profile building. I mean, I think it's like 3 or 4 stories. So for that plane to basically like go parallel to the ground for however long it needed to, kind of like float above the ground and then smash into the Pentagon. I mean, that's like Top Gun, Maverick type flight ability. So again, remember, Pentagon, also no plane. And then what else in regards to that? All right, there's some more stuff about the Pentagon, but let's see what Candace gets back into.
Of course, the second thing, and this one really drives people crazy. You are not supposed to remember this at all. But it turns out that there were some people who definitively knew that something was going to take place on that day. Some people came camera ready to capture what was going to happen on that day. Of course, notoriously, ABC News covered a woman who looked out and saw what was soon determined to be Israelis celebrating, she said celebrating, dancing after the towers were hit. Take a listen to this segment.
In the days after the September attacks, there were countless rumors about strange coincidences surrounding the events. One report about a group of Middle Eastern men spotted the morning of September 11th parked just across the river from New York City has not gone away. Investigation of their presence has led to questions about whether Israel was conducting espionage on U.S. soil. We're joined now by ABC's John Miller with an exclusive report this evening.
That's right, Elizabeth. This is a case that took the FBI and the CIA more than 2 months to sort out, while 5 Israelis waited in jail. It began when this woman was watching the Twin Towers burning from her apartment in New Jersey. She noticed 3 men on top of a van, posing for pictures with the towers burning in the background.
And I could see that they were like happy. They didn't look shocked to me. They didn't look shocked. I thought it was very strange.
The witness called police, who stopped the van hours later and arrested 5 men. All 5, it turns out, were Israeli. They were turned over to the FBI.
So I think these are the guys that they call the dancing Israelis. So if you Google or YouTube or TikTok or whatever, the dancing Israelis, this is the part of the story.
Sources tell ABC News during a check of national security databases, some of the men were listed as having had connections with Israeli intelligence. At the FBI, that set off alarm bells. The FBI needed the answers to 3 important questions. Who were these men? What brought them to that parking lot on the morning of September 11th? And did they have any advance knowledge of what was going to happen that day? The men said they were just taking pictures at the time. They said they worked for a company called Urban Moving. The FBI obtained a search warrant for the company's offices.
2 SUVs were filled up with between 9 and 12 boxes and computers.
Not long after the arrests, the offices of Urban Moving were simply abandoned. Almost everything was left behind.
By the way, remember, this is like 2001 or 2002. So this is like right after it happened. And obviously, news and reporting was very different back then. I don't think there was any real questioning of, mainstream media and them having a slant or a direction.
In jail, the 5 Israelis were repeatedly interrogated and given lie detector tests. Stephen Gordon was their American lawyer.
They were asked questions if they had ever been approached by or hired by any non-United States intelligence community.
While there is still some debate among American intelligence officials, many investigators believe some of the men were part of an Israeli operation aimed at monitoring radical Islamic charities that support groups like Hamas.
He said support groups like Hamas. So again, here's another Actually, the only thing I want to point out by that is that just shows you what's taken place over in Gaza, Palestine, Israel. Like I said, it didn't start October 7th because this is 2001 and they're talking about Hamas.
Something lawyers for the 5 men and the Israeli government strongly deny.
These 5 Israelis were not involved in any intelligence operation in the United States. The story is simply false.
In the end, the FBI concluded there was no evidence that any of the 5 men had advance knowledge of the September 11th plot. After 71 days, the 5 Israelis were deported, leaving some ruffled feathers among both U.S. and Israeli officials. According to federal officials, the 5 men have been barred from returning to the United States for 10 years, they say because they violated immigration laws.
Bottom line, John, is there any evidence any of these 5 men knew about the September 11th attacks before they occurred?
The FBI spent a great deal of time examining this question. It does not appear that they were in place taking pictures before the planes hit, but shortly thereafter. And they say they haven't uncovered evidence that any of these 5 men, and they did their backgrounds, they searched apartments, they telephone records and so on, had any advanced knowledge of the attack.
And while the FBI or certain sources might believe that, in fact, they were Israeli intelligence, they don't believe that the U.S. was a target, that they were actually investigating Muslim groups?
They believe if this was an intelligence operation by Israel, that it was focused on the Islamic groups and charities that raise money for groups that are considered by U.S. law enforcement and others terrorist groups. And you'll note that after September 11th, the U.S. moved on many of these groups with indictments, arrests, raids on their headquarters, something that hadn't happened prior to this.
These are groups that Israel believes have been funding Hamas and other terrorist organizations?
Groups that are responsible for most of the suicide bombings there.
I seriously don't remember what her take is going to be, so let's see what she says.
What can I say other than no further comment? You know, I'm just disappointed that ABC News would run such an anti-Semitic segment regarding our friend and our ally.
For those that don't speak sarcasm, she is speaking sarcastically.
Then there was the strange case of Otigo. You may have heard me speaking about this in a prior episode. So Otigo, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but it was an instant messaging service. It was Israel-owned, and it was operated by Israel with headquarters that were based just 2 blocks away from the World Trade Center. Now, according to Haaretz, that is an Israeli-owned publication. Check out this headline, which was published September 26, 2021. So that's 15 days after the attack. 15 days after 9/11, Haaretz says that Otigo workers were warned of the attacks. I'm not saying this. Israeli publication is saying this, and I will read this article verbatim. It says, Otigo, the instant messaging service, says that 2 of its workers received messages 2 hours before the Twin Towers attack on September 11th, predicting that the attack would happen. And the company has been cooperating with Israeli and American law enforcement, including the FBI, in trying to find the original sender of the message, which predicted the attack. I mean, seriously, what on earth are we talking about here? Thereafter, and this is like 2 weeks after 9/11, the vice president of Otigo, it was a man named Alex Diamandis, said that the messages told him that something big was going to happen in a certain amount of time, and it did, almost to the minute. That is a direct quote from the vice president of Otigo. The messages said something big was going to happen in a certain amount of time, and it did, almost to the minute.
All right, I do not remember that at all. I'm not talking her episode. I'm saying in 2001, Otigo, any of that stuff. That I did not remember any of that, but I did look it up, and it is exactly how she's describing it.
So for whatever reason, the forewarned Otigo employees did not think that they should just pass that message along to the authorities. Our friends and our allies didn't pass that message along to the authorities, which would have saved thousands of lives. 2 weeks after 9/11, you have this guy saying that. You figure out that you have tons of people that are coming out saying that maybe Israel knew that this was going to happen. Now we know that there's this camera. And then there was a CNN report that came out on September 28th, 2001, which further cemented that fact. And again, I'm showing you this directly from CNN. It reads, quote, the FBI is looking into whether a warning sent to employees at an instant message company less than 2 hours before the jetliner slammed into the World Trade Center was connected to the attacks, a company executive confirmed on Friday. Okay, So Alex Diamandis, again, that's the vice president of ODACO, said that there was nothing specifically about the attacks. Like, they didn't know that it was going to be a plane that was going to hit, but that it was suspicious in nature because of its timing. He said, quote, "I would describe it as a threat and a warning." He then declined to comment further, citing ongoing investigations. Then there were 2 employees that worked at the ODACO offices in Israel, because they had an Israel base, and they say that they received a message at about 7 a.m. Eastern on September 11th. After the attacks, the staff decided to scour the server logs in order to determine the source of the message, and the information was then passed on to Israeli authorities. And then it's just a cold trail, you guys. So for reference, the first tower was struck at 8:46 a.m., They received a message at 7 o'clock a.m., but your media just lost interest in this. There was no interest in this because, well, we found passports, and the passports make it clear that we are supposed to be really angry at Muslims and all of these other weird things that happen. I don't even know why people are speaking about it. There's no interest in any other subject. Now, let me show you this. This is a Jerusalem Post headline. Jerusalem Post, by the way, it is based in Jerusalem. If that's not obvious, this is from September 12th, 2001. It has since been archived. And it says, quote, "The foreign ministry in Jerusalem has so far received the names of 4,000 Israelis believed to have been in the area of the World Trade Center and the Pentagon at the time of the attack."
Okay, I actually kind of remember where she's going with this. And, it really does speak to the question of, was there any forewarning that something was going to happen to anyone? And so she's basically saying there were 4,000 Israelis in the area at the time of the attack.
Okay. Remarkably, here's an update for you. Despite having 4,000 employees in the area, including an entire company, ODACO, which received prior warning of this attack, it turns out, at least according to somebody who was traveling with Bibi Netanyahu to the 9/11 Memorial Center.
Mama, there goes that man again. Oh, man. She brought up Bibi Netanyahu's name. Wow, that's crazy.
That a total of 4 Israeli citizens died on that day. I'm going to show you that clip. There's a clip of Bibi Netanyahu with his wife visiting the memorial, and you'll hear somebody in his entourage say that just 4 Israeli citizens died that day. Take a listen.
This whole section that we see here running all the way down is all Cantor Fitzgerald folks.
And so how many Israelis?
There's 4 Israelis altogether. Okay.
I do remember Cantor Fitzgerald. I remember that company name. But anyway, so net, I think she's got a little more to say about it. But remember, the Jerusalem Post said there were 4,000 in the area, and then it looks like only 4 died. I mean, that's 4 too many, but 4 out of 4,000.
I'm happy. I wish that no Americans or Israelis had died on that day. I think it's an interesting development, but I am happy because it is sad when innocent people lose their lives, and something that you could argue was avoidable if other people were able to avoid it because they received prior knowledge of the event. All right, so some people really are just that lucky. That's, you got to understand. People just get lucky, and I'll tell you, Larry Silverstein, he is one such person. By the way,
so she's about to get into Larry Silverstein. This was the guy that bought the World Trade Centers roughly 6 months before this happened and ended up taking out, if I'm remembering correctly, like a double insurance policy on it, which again, that's not weird. Obviously, you want to insure the buildings. A double insurance policy, maybe that's a little bit weird, but he ended up taking out a double insurance policy. And obviously, after having been able to make the insurance claims, homeboy got paid.
You can fact check this and go down your own rabbit hole, but I was trying to figure out what this guy's background is, and apparently he owned a lot of clubs, like dance clubs, and there was a very interesting lawsuit brought against Larry Silverstein back in 2003. It was eventually dropped by the courts. They weren't, the Vietnam War veteran was not able to bring it forward in New York, but he was alleging that Larry Silverstein and Bill Clinton and other politicians were involved in intentionally trying to flood heroin into America. Very interesting, but park that aside because it doesn't matter because Larry Silverstein is not known for any of that today. Rather, he is known as somebody who should buy a lottery ticket every single day. So now he's recognized as a prominent New York State real estate developer. I should mention here, but he is a personal friend of Bibi Netanyahu, whose name just keeps coming up all the time, I'm telling you.
Oh my God, she is hilarious. All right, so in case, I can't believe you wouldn't know this, but maybe you don't know. So Bibi Netanyahu is the same Benjamin Netanyahu that I have talked about loathing, and along with Lindsey Graham and Speaker Mike Johnson. Those are my top three. Those are my top three that I'm not a fan, not a fan, not a fan.
A very connected person. This is Silverstein, connected to Israeli politicians. He's extremely loyal to Israel, also friends with other prime ministers, Ehud Barak. Well, guess what? He obtained the lease for the Twin Towers just 6 weeks prior to 9/11.
Oh, wow. I think I said 6 months. I thought it was 6 months. So he got the lease to the Twin Towers 6 weeks prior. That is lucky. Lucky Larry.
He took out an insurance policy, which fortunately included coverage for acts of terrorism. So lucky that it included coverage for acts of terrorism, so that when it came time to collect, Silverstein claimed that there were 2 incidences of terror since 2 buildings had been hit by planes, which allowed him to seek for double indemnity. So he collected $4.5 billion from insurance on towers that he had invested in just 6 weeks earlier. I was pretty shocked when I looked into this. I checked. I was like, there's just no way. Nope. There's no debunking of that. That is an absolute fact. Now, they say that that doesn't imply that he had foreknowledge that this event was going to happen. And getting insurance is, in fact, normal. To be fair, it is normal to get insurance if you are going to take out a lease on these 2 buildings. And he also had some other investors that invested with him, and they all just got extremely lucky. And I'm talking super lucky, because beyond that, okay, so Larry Silverstein was known for spending every morning the exact same way in breakfast meetings at the World Trade Center. This is according to him. He spoke about this in various interviews. But fortunately, so fortunately for Lucky Larry, on the morning of 9/11, he decided, I'm just going to break this habit because I want to go see a dermatologist. And that's what happened. He skipped his normal breakfast meeting to see the dermatologist, which ended up saving his life. And that's not all.
All right, this is pretty wild. I've seen a bunch of videos on this. So yeah, he skipped his normal breakfast, which he did religiously that day to go see this dermatologist. And so instead of having breakfast on like the 91st floor, I think, of the World Trade Center, he was not there that day.
Larry also has 2 children who also worked in the World Trade Center and who also were running late on 9/11. So the entire Silverstein family survived and were therefore able to be alive when they collected that insurance money for that terrorist attack, which fortunately they had taken out a clause on in their insurance. So
I haven't really said shucky ducky quack quack in a long time, but this would be a moment to say shucky ducky quack quack.
Yeah, Lucky Larry. What are we going to make all of this? A lot of this has been memory hold. By the way, super weird video. I'm not sure if you've seen this. People sometimes, when you talk about Larry Silverstein, they'll say, "Pull it, Larry." And there's a reason for that. So Larry decided to sit down and do all of these interviews about 9/11 thereafter because he's the person that owned these buildings. People wanted to hear from him regarding this terrible terrorist event. And he shared this story about how he was on the phone with the fire department because, it's really strange. If you examine the footage of Building 7 collapsing, have you guys actually seen that footage? You probably, maybe, I'm just going to jog your memory because, and by the way, don't listen to me. I am totally being conspiratorial here.
All right, so remember, Building 7 is that 3rd building that I believe was maybe a few buildings down from the World Trade Center, and it was the one that just collapsed several hours later, and it almost looked like a controlled demolition. I think she was going to talk about this, but again, surprisingly, I've had the 9/11 discussion with a few people, and there have been people that were like, wait a minute, there was a third building that got hit. And it's like, no, it didn't get hit by anything, but it just collapsed in free fall speed, controlled demolition style. And they said, again, I remember they were saying that, it collapsed because of heat created by the fire from the jet fuel.
It looks like it was a demolition. I mean, I've seen a demolition before. Look at this video of the building going down. Yeah, there you go. And then it just kind of collapses all at once. Yeah, that's a video. I'm actually going to show you a side by side because I'm just going, that really looks like a controlled demolition. Look at this side by side. That you don't even know which one is Building 7.
So she's showing a video right now of a controlled demolition on one side and then Building 7 on the other side. And again, I'm sure you've seen a controlled demolition. It just like falls down all in like one column, basically, like it pancakes down onto itself.
That's just a side-by-side demolition and Building 7. So this obviously inspired tons of conspiracy theories, which were only furthered by this interview of Larry talking about how he told the fire department chief to pull it. Now I'm going to tell you what he says about why he said that. But first, let's listen to Larry Silverstein, Lucky Larry, in his own words.
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
That's pretty weird to tell the fire department to pull it. Like, how does he get the ability to have that decision-making power?
That's very interesting. A lot of things interesting. So here I go with common sense again. I hate this, but, on a day like this, people running, screaming, being buried in rubble, looking for loved ones, fire department must have received how many phone calls? And you're telling me that the fire commander thought to himself in this emergency, hey, I should call and get the opinion of the building owner on how to do my job. I don't know. That strikes me as weird. Maybe I'm not a powerful person in New York City because I always imagined that like if my house was on fire and I wasn't there because I was at the dermatologist conveniently, thank goodness, and it was just burning down, I just don't think that the fire commander would call me and say, hey, what's your opinion, man? It's just burning. And then I would say like, yeah, pull it. Like it's my job to direct the fire department on how to do their job. It just seems weird that I would be in touch with them. Is that a normal thing? Maybe it is. Maybe this is a New York City thing. Weird. I was born in New York and I just don't remember that like buddy thing. Like here's who we call. Usually they do their job and there was a lot going on that day. But apparently this guy thought, let me call the owner of the building and get his opinion on what we should do about Building 7.
I seriously love her sarcasm. Oh my God. All right. I mean, again, I'm really not even trying to sway your thought process. It's just when you present the facts, with hindsight, it's just insane.
And so when Larry was pushed on this, like, why would you say pull it? By the way, in general, pull what? He was like, oh, I just meant like pull the operation. Like he's saying, I meant let's not send any more fire department people. Let's not send any more firemen in there. We don't want any more loss of life. So pull them out. Because again, this would have been his decision somehow. That's what he meant. And then people looked into that story and there were some holes because the fire commander said that he never spoke to Larry. And there's one independent journalist named Luke Rutkowski who decided to confront Larry about his story not matching up with the memory of the fire chief. Take a listen.
This one's for Larry Silverstein. Last time we talked, sir, I asked you if you could address some of the 9/11 conspiracy theories that you're accused of. Sadly, your response has actually invited more of them. I mean, for the record, everybody knows your infamous comments on PBS where you said pull Building 7. On 5/25 on the day of 9/11.
They were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. I said, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
Your official response was that it was the firefighters. My question is, it was pretty clear that you meant the building, and if it was the firefighters, they already are outside the building by 12 because the water lines were broken.
Ask the question.
And the fire chief that you said you spoke to, Fire Chief Negro, denies talking to you on that day of 9/11. Can you answer those questions and address the theories against you?
You know, honestly, I just don't feel like doing this, but I should research that reporter and kind of see what happened to him and whether he basically asked or axed career-ending question there.
I suggest everybody's consideration that we all look at the thousands of pages of testimony that have been rendered in the many years since 9/11. And let's use today's session for some of this.
Are you aware of testimony of bombs in the building before the building collapsed, sir? Are you aware of that testimony?
By the way, there is tons of testimony online about people that said there were bombs found in the building on various floors. But it sounds like this reporter now is probably getting escorted out of this press conference because of what he just asked him.
Sir, there's testimony by Barry Jennings. Sir, you don't have to touch me. Listen, I'll walk away. All I'm asking is a question. I don't have to be kicked out. It's a legitimate question. You don't have to put your hands on me. But all I'm saying is, no, I'm not. I'm here asking. The question was not answered. That's why I have a grievance. Larry Silverstein was told not to come into work. That's why him, his daughter, and his son never showed up to work on 9/11. He put an insurance policy on the buildings. Reporters, do your job. Please ask some questions.
I mean, that is insane that was the only reporter asking that type stuff. And by the way, this kind of plays into what I talked about in yesterday's episode. You know, one thing, and the rubber's going to meet the road with Trump's presidency, is he going to revisit all this stuff? Is he going to declassify all this information? And is he going to actually, there's a lot of information that again remains classified, and, declassify it. Let us see what the reality was with all this stuff. I don't think it's going to happen.
Well, obviously, Luke is crazy. It's inappropriate to ask questions. Larry really is just that lucky, just tremendously lucky. And so what if he misremembered the story about speaking to the fire chief and saying, pull it? These things happen in a tragedy where you recall speaking to someone that maybe doesn't remember speaking to you or whatever. Again, purpose of this episode is to tell you the things that I'm going to need you to forget because I am sick of these conspiracy theories. On the other side of this, there are some people who really are just that unlucky. And one such example, and so they're telling you, listen, you got to just believe in his luck. Larry's lucky, but BBC really was just unlucky when they accidentally reported that Building 7 had fallen 23 minutes before it fell. So what I just showed you, yeah, they already reported 23 minutes before it fell that it had fallen. And they already had the pre-baked excuse for why it fell, despite the fact that it was not hit by a plane. Anyways, just take a listen to the report that came out 23 minutes too early.
All right. So, it makes more sense when you see the video report. But basically what she's talking about is, and you can actually Google this or TikTok it or YouTube it, and you can watch it for yourself. Just Google BBC Building 7 report, and it definitely will come up. It'll absolutely come up in TikTok, which is another reason why I like TikTok. But basically, their reporter reported on Building 7 falling down already, and it wasn't falling down already. It's literally standing up in the background of the reporter.
More on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard a few moments ago I was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing. And indeed it has. Apparently that's only a few hundred yards away from where the World Trade Center towers were. And it seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attack.
So again, just to reiterate, remember, the story with Building 7 was that it had been structurally weakened because it was near the towers. I mean, it's just so absurd that has never happened to any building in any country since.
Well, the building had been weakened. You know how it is sometimes, like when your house is on fire and so then the house next to you just completely collapses. No? Hello? None of you guys never seen that situation happen? Well, sometimes if there's a house on fire, just the house across the street can get stressed out and just feels fundamentally weakened. And Larry says to pull it, because it's just, there's no point in losing any more life. And he says that to, we don't know who. Doesn't matter because he's at a dermatologist appointment. Anyways, let's move on. I feel like this is just getting crazy. It doesn't matter that they reported a little bit early. They had a perfectly valid excuse. They said that they copied the report from another publication, Reuters. Reuters said it first, which doesn't really answer the question as to why any of them said it first before the tower had actually fallen, given that the tower was not directly next door. There were also buildings in between that did not fall, but this tower did. There is actually something interesting to know in case you haven't looked into it about Building 7, World Trade Center Building 7. Do you know who the tenants are? Like who was working there at the time? Well, you had the CIA, the DOD, the Secret Service, the IRS, and the SEC. All of that was what was going on in that building, as well as other multinational investment banks. Very interesting. That tower fell in under 7 seconds, like a textbook type of implosion of some sort, regardless of it not being struck by an airplane or having any kind of structural damage. It just went down. Yeah, you're like, I don't even know which one of these is supposed to be Building 7. But yeah, that is what happened. And like I said, that was reported 23 minutes before it had even happened. Who could have imagined it? Who could have been so unlucky as to have accidentally predicted that it was going to fall?
All right, so I think she's pounding this thing into the ground. But basically, all of those departments and government agencies that were housed in Building 7, the quote-unquote rumor is that they wanted to get rid of the documents that were housed in Building 7 in relation to those government agencies. That's all over the internet. So that's why Building 7, I guess, had his feelings hurt and decided to collapse.
But then let's flip again, because some people really are that lucky. We're back to luck again. It was an unlucky, but then it was lucky because the Pentagon, now that's a really interesting thing. And this really is the number 5 thing that I'm going to have to ask all of you guys to simply forget. Okay.
All right, I really don't remember where she's going with this next section in terms of Building 7, but just remember, that clip I played earlier from ABC News with that guy, Jamie McIntyre. And by the way, you can Google all this stuff for yourself. You seriously can. Just Google like Jamie McIntyre, ABC News, Pentagon, and what was said about that clip from Jamie McIntyre was that it aired once on ABC News and then they took it down. But that's another clip that is on TikTok. It's sitting there.
A lot of strange things about the Pentagon. A lot of strange things happened that day. But you should know that leading up, Pentagon was getting audited, and they had, and they always have done this really since, lost $2.3 trillion. Oopsies. I know we keep taxing you guys, and we're taxing you because of things, NASA, which has become a black budget, and wars overseas that are not really tangible. But then it comes time to audit. So the way that audit works is that the DOD is supposed to audit the Pentagon.
All right, for those of you that have listened for a long time, you'll remember I played a clip with Jon Stewart and a woman from the Pentagon. Actually, let me see if I can find it. All right, you know what? It's like a 5-minute clip, so I don't really want to play that. But it talked about waste, fraud, and abuse. He was interviewing this woman who was the Secretary of Defense or something, not the actual Secretary of Defense, but I think she worked in the Secretary of Defense's office. And he was saying how it's ridiculous that the Pentagon fails, $1 trillion audit, and they can't account for over $1 trillion. Now, in regards to the 9/11, if you remember, and let me see if I can find this one, but Donald Rumsfeld Donald Rumsfeld, the neocon brother, the neocon of neocons, along with George W. Bush and Dick Cheney and Paul Wolfowitz and all those guys, he actually had given a speech about their inability to locate, I think it was $2.3 trillion. Ironically, he had given a speech at the Pentagon on September 10th.
Before 9/11, the day before the attacks, Rumsfeld gave a press conference where he talked about trillions of dollars missing. The day, then a plane slams into the very part of the building where they were doing the accounting, blows up half the fucking building in the Pentagon, blows up a wall. Donald Rumsfeld was on, where was it, the White House lawn?
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
2.3. Okay, now, again, somebody told you that literally, like right before 9/11 happened, they said they couldn't track $2.3 trillion. No, that didn't happen. That did not happen, but it did happen.
What the fuck?
Yeah, so think about what Kennedy said. Think about what you saw when you saw that Vice movie.
Again, if you just go into TikTok and type in Donald Rumsfeld trillions, there's a plethora of these clips that will come up. I picked this one because this is Joe Rogan talking to that comedian Jimmy Dore, who I think is hilarious. And, you know, he talks about this Vice movie. I'm going to have to go back and watch that. I think that was actually really good. And that talked a lot about the neoconservative movement.
Where Dick Cheney, who was the CEO of Halliburton, becomes a vice president and gets billions of dollars in no-bid contracts. Now think about what we just saw with Donald Rumsfeld saying they couldn't find $2.3 trillion. I don't know where what? I don't know. It seems like we should have had it. So like, we'll keep looking. Oh no, the spot where we looked just blew up.
Oh my God. What the
Find out
hell?
if that's true. If it was the accounting office, because this is what I love to say it because it sounds good, but let's make sure it's true that part blew up. But either way, that he did say that, and then they did get hit by a plane a couple of days later.
Plane or a Scud missile, and it was the next day, by the way. Rumsfeld gave that speech on September 10th, 2001, and 9/11 happened that next day. Man, that's like a Lucky Larry situation. What are the odds of that?
So you're following me here. The DOD's office was in the World Trade Center. And so they are auditing in Building 7. Where did the $2.3 trillion go? And they issued a report, the DOD, saying that they're not giving us any of the files. We're unable to say and account for this $2.3 trillion. You had Donald Rumsfeld being like, well, you know, technology is changing and we're doing things the old way here at the Pentagon. And in the old way, we just can't find $2.3 trillion. And then, could you imagine, both World Trade Center, where they're doing the auditing, goes kaput, and then the Pentagon gets hit by a plane. I know. It's just so weird. So there were all these people who were like, yeah, why haven't we seen a plane hitting it? You remember this? You remember being alive for this? It was just, you looked at the building and there was just kind of a hole in the middle. We were told a plane hit. And what was interesting is actually CNN.
Oh, I think she's going to talk about and play the same clip I played. It actually was originally filmed by ABC and then aired on CNN and all the other networks. This is funny. This actually shows me I do Candace Owens level, quality level research. I'm bringing the same clips.
Had a reporter on the ground that day that was able to get up close to this after the crash and reported that there was no plane. By the way, they only aired this once, and then it got memory hold. So I'm going to show you what this reporter said, who was able to walk up to the Pentagon building after it was allegedly hit by a plane. Take a listen.
Outside the Pentagon, CNN's military affairs correspondent Jamie McIntyre. And Jamie, you got very close to where that plane went down.
That's right, Judy. A while ago, I walked right up to next to the building. Firefighters were still trying to put out the blaze. The fire, by the way, is still burning in some parts of the Pentagon. And I took a look at the huge gaping hole that's in this sideway. But from my close-up inspection, there's no evidence of a plane having crashed anywhere near the Pentagon. The only site is the actual side of the building that's crashed in. And as I said, the only pieces left that you can see are small enough that you could pick up in your hand. There are no large tail sections, wing sections, fuselage, nothing like that anywhere around.
Yeah, that was the same exact clip. I mean, I guess it doesn't hurt hearing it multiple times because it reinforces how just insane it is that you've got a guy on national TV. And again, maybe it was CNN. He did say CNN there. So maybe that did air originally on CNN. But how crazy is it that you have the on-air reporter? And again, remember, this is 2001. So all of this craziness with misinformation and disinformation from the mainstream media and fake news, this stuff doesn't exist yet. Well, we think it doesn't exist. But how crazy is it that he's reporting from the ground and he's not seeing a plane? There's no plane.
Yeah, and they didn't show us anything for years. A lot of this stuff was classified. And also what's really interesting is they decided to confiscate 82 videos of people that just had CCTV footage, gas station across the street. The FBI agents went out there and made sure within the first minutes following this attack that they confiscated all of the footage surrounding of this plane that allegedly hit the Pentagon. And there were military men that were there that day that swore that they heard a missile, said that they had lived there, had fought overseas. It was unmistakable what the sound of a missile was, and they heard a missile that day. And I'm just going to show you, by the way, the Pentagon building here after the plane, which that CNN reporter is saying he did not see even when he was up close and examining firefighters, which were whom were trying to get the fire out. This was it right here. So yeah, a plane must have gone into there sideways, and then for whatever reason was unable to be observed by a reporter that was up close. And for whatever reason, people that were there that day who said that they heard a missile were quieted, were not being listened to by the public. And we were just told that a plane definitively hit the Pentagon. But the more important story here.
Again, you can Google the picture, but if you look at the Pentagon, it just looks like it's folded sideways, and again, there's no plane.
Is that the Pentagon then, how could we ask them after such a horrific terrorist attack, to still be held to trying to find those trillions of dollars? That's so unfair. We had to come together as a nation, accept that we had been blindly robbed by the Pentagon, because that's what we do in times of a mass psychosis event. We come together, we hug, and we decide that, hey, that's all right if you lost $3.2 trillion. We don't know where it went. You don't know where it went. And conveniently, the two offices that should know where it went, the people that are auditing, are now no longer available. They've just been taken out by terrorist attacks.
Oh, that's funny. She said 3.2 trillion. She meant to say 2.3 trillion. Actually, that makes me feel a lot better that Candace Owens also makes mistakes, because I've caught myself when I've listened to the episode the day after, and I interchange numbers sometimes. That happens, man. We're not perfect. In
case you don't know, the Pentagon controls nearly 70% of the budget of the federal government. And yet when they make announcements like the $600 billion that is currently missing right now in aid that has gone to Ukraine, no one seems to ever bat an eyelash. Yeah, it does seem pretty obvious that they are funneling money through the Pentagon without any issues. And when you ask questions, well, that's not appropriate. That's not you being a patriotic American. Rah, 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 war, war, war. And by the way, that, again, was obviously the end result of 9/11. Forget all the holes, forget all the questions, forget all the conspiracy theorists, forget the fact that the term conspiracy theorist only came into the lexicon, only entered into the American conscience after JFK was shot.
By the way, that's totally true. So the term conspiracy theorist was created right after John F. Kennedy was shot. And it was because you had a lot of people, doubting what took place with Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby, that's literally when that term was created.
And a lot of the same suspects were on the ground the day that JFK was shot too. I should do an episode on all of the weird things and similarly things that are classified and just will never get declassified about JFK being shot. We just have this habit of just, no, forget it. Just forget it. The point is, hate Muslims.
That's hilarious. All right, come on. This girl is funny, man. She's witty. The point is...
No, forget it. Just forget it. The point is, hate Muslims. That is the point. That is the lesson. That is the my psychosis formation. And if you ever break from that and you start to wonder whether or not it is plausible that your government could be so evil that they would allow this event to take place, that they would allow American citizens to be ruthlessly murdered because there was a larger military industrial complex incentives that they wanted to help feed, a larger narrative, and maybe it was simply an incursion, a nonstop incursion into the Middle East. If you ever get that idea, if you then start thinking, okay, well, didn't we then kind of inexplicably go to war with Iraq despite the fact that the passports that were found were Saudi? And then we said we were going to war with Iraq because of weapons of mass destruction, that we then went in there and we killed 1 million, I'm talking 1 million Iraqi civilians, women and children murdered ruthlessly looking for weapons of mass destruction that were then never found. If you start thinking about that,
all right, that was a serious summary of everything we've talked about so many times, and gosh, I think even earlier in this episode. But seriously, that was an incredible summary of, what happened after 9/11. That gave the ability to do all of that, go into Iraq, kill 1 million innocent civilians. I mean, that number is insane. It's hard to even comprehend because, like I said, unless it happens to us in America, it's tough for us to really even understand it.
And then you go, wait a second, and then we just suddenly pulled out, and then we were in Afghanistan, and this is all because of Saudi, and we never invaded Saudi, and what is going on? How does any of this make sense? If you start to put that all together and then arrive at this question of literally what the hell is the United States doing in the Middle East? How could war in the Middle East ever be serving our interests way over here? If you get that idea and you start asking yourself that question, let me remind you that it's dangerous. It's a dangerous question to ask yourself. It's a dangerous conspiracy theory to ask yourself. And only the craziest conspiracy theorists would just go back and look at evidence and believe their own eyes. We have journalists now, and those journalists are in the mainstream, and they will be doing the observing for you, and they will tell you what to think. And so, like I said, put that away and just remember the instructions. The instructions are to hate Muslims, to never ask what the hell it is we're doing in the Middle East and why we can't stop, to never ask which country it is that is benefiting from everything that we're doing in the Middle East. And, don't believe your own eyes. That's always the point, the main point. Don't believe your own eyes.
All right, that's it. There's a little bit more, but I'm just going to end it there. Anyway, all right. I've been wanting to do that one for a while. I'm going to try and find other good episodes from other people that I think would be very enlightening. Actually, Candace did another episode on Michael Jackson, and that one was really good too. So I'll definitely bring that to you guys. But regardless, again, the point of all this is simply one thing, and that is to just open your mind up to kind of what's going on currently. You know what I mean? Like, this isn't really even about revisiting the past and, critiquing it. It's more about understanding that if this stuff could happen in a time when we never expected to be manipulated, then what about now when, quite frankly, we do expect to be manipulated and we're much more aware of it? So anyway, that's kind of the point of all this. I hope it was enjoyable. I thought it was pretty good. Hopefully you got a few laughs out of it as well, and that's about it. All right, everybody, have a great weekend. We will catch up with you next week.
That was a great way to end it.
This episode was brought to you by the new book Deep Shallow Dive Into You, available now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble in hardcover and paperback. Don't forget to sign up for our new mailing list on our website at deepshallowdive.com.